Hey everyone, so in the previous video we looked at what a deck with one of the new characters in 3.4 would look like. We basically looked at a deck tag for the Beidou Superconduct team, and I thought it would be interesting to look at the other new character that we got in 3.4. So Klee is actually a character that did pretty well in the recent meta games. It's won a couple of tournaments so far since 3.4 has gone live. So today what we are going to do is that we are going to be looking at Klee as a character in the TCG. We're going to pick apart what makes her so special and what are the best ways to take advantage of her unique abilities. And after that, I'd like to look at one of the decks that have been doing pretty well in the recent tournaments. So this is a Klee Vaporise deck that Juslin has created and piloted to a 5-0 finish in the most recent Asian tournament. And I think it's a really fun list. Juslin has also made a Word document guide, and instead of repeating all of the recommendations from start to finish, instead of repeating all of the different strategies word for word, what I would do in this video is just to call up some of the highlights, some of the key lessons that I've learned from this guide that I thought was super useful, because I'm not a super experienced person when it comes to FTK plays and FTK lines, and I thought some of these things were actually super helpful to learn about. So what I would do is to just go through some of those highlights and look at some gameplay videos, and I would actually recommend that just look at the guide that Juslin has created, because it is 8 page of goodness. It is very good information, and it's very succinct as well. So yeah, let's get back into the video and let's talk about Klee first. So Klee, what is she like as a TCG character, and how do you play her, how do you build your strategy around her, and how does she look like in a team? So the first thing you must notice about Klee is that she only deals pyro damage. In her normal attack, in her elemental skill, her elemental burst, she only deals elemental damage. And the first thing you must think about is, how can I put Klee in a team that triggers elemental reactions so that I can maximize the amount of damage I can get out of Klee. So remember this, whenever you see a character that only deals elemental damage, you must think about what sort of elemental reactions you want to trigger. So a normal attack is nothing special. It's pretty much the pyro version of Mona's attack, right? Essentially, you pay 3 dice, one you get 1 pyro damage. But what is slightly unique, or what is unique about Klee is her elemental skill. With Jumpty Dumpty, you pay 3 dice, you deal 3 pyro damage, and then basically she gains this thing called Explosive Spark. What is Explosive Spark? It's actually something that forces you to do maths, because there's a whole bunch of conditions you must fulfill in order for you to get additional damage. So Explosive Spark is a status card that you will attach to Klee after you use Elemental Skill. What it says is that when your character, when Klee uses a charge attack the next time, you spend 1 less pyro dice and you deal +1 damage, and you can only use Explosive Spark 1 time. What is a charge attack? A charge attack is basically any normal attack that you use when the elemental dice is even. So this is what I mean by you need to do some maths in order to play Klee properly, because in order for you to trigger the additional buff, you must have an even number of dice. So what this means is that when you start, let's say you start the game with Klee, right? Let's say you want to use all 8 dice with Klee. You're going to use Jumpty Dumpty once, right? You do 3 pyro damage, and then you get Explosive Spark. But then you're left with 5 dice. And what this means is that your normal attack does not actually deal 2 damage. It still deals 1 damage, and you must still pay 3 to deal that 1 damage. How do you get that rebate? The only way you can get that discount and get that buff is that you play Jumpty Dumpty once. You spend 3 dice, you're down to 5. You can maybe play a Liu Su or something to bring yourself down to an even number of elemental dice, which is 4. And then you can play the normal attack for 2 dice and dealing 2 pyro damage. Alternatively, what you can also do is to play Jumpty Dumpty twice, bringing you down to 2 dice, and then dealing that normal attack for 2 damage. Now, the question is going to be, is that efficient and how much damage can I do? So let's assume that you only send Klee out as your first character and you only want to maximize all of your dice on Klee's damage. So what you can do is that you can play Jumpty Dumpty twice, you deal 6 pyro damage, and then with the last 2 dice, you deal 2 damage with that normal attack. So it means that, without any buffs, without any other sort of weapons, etc., the maximum damage that you can deal with Klee alone is 8 damage. But I don't think that is efficient. And also, one other thing you must take note of is that Explosive Spark does not stack. So if you want to use all of your dice on Klee to maximize her damage, right? So you use Jumpty Dumpty twice, and then you use the normal attack. What you must recognize is that you will only get Explosive Spark the first time you use the elemental skill. You do not get it the second time you use the elemental skill. It does not stack. The moment you get it, and then you're not able to get one more. So I don't think that is super efficient, and that is basically why you have to play other characters like Mona, or I've seen some people play Klee with the likes of Chong'un, Ayaka, or Ganyu, just to get that sort of elemental reaction damage in. So bottom line is this Explosive Spark is a pretty interesting card, because if you do the maths correctly, you can deal a lot of elemental reaction damage. You can even get a first turn kill if you do this correctly, and we can talk about that a bit later. It is also in Juslin's guide, but I'll talk about it later. The final thing that is unique about Klee is her Elemental Burst. So her Elemental Burst is good because it only deals 3 damage, right? But then it also creates this field effect called Sparks and Flash, or Sparks and Splash at your opponent's play area. What Sparks and Splash does is essentially every time, or rather, for every time your opponent uses a skill, for example, a normal attack, elemental skill, or a burst, whenever they attack you, that active character would take 2 pyro damage. And that is actually pretty powerful in this particular team, because just imagine your opponent forgets about Sparks and Splash, they do damage to you, and they take 2 pyro damage. And then if Mona has her Mirror Reflection of Doom dealing 1 hydro damage at the end of your end phase. Essentially it's 1 damage plus 2 damage from Sparks and Splash plus 2 more Vaporize damage for a total of 5 damage in the end phase. And towards the end of the game, 5 damage can be lethal, so Sparks and Splash is a pretty interesting elemental burst because it might catch your opponents off guard, and yeah, it might sneak a kill over your opponent. So that is Klee, and that is her basic kit, and this is why she is good and interesting, and that's basically the kind of way that you should be using her. The other key thing about Klee is that since she is a Pyro character, you'll be able to use her Pyro Elemental Resonance, which says the next time you do any sort of Pyro related reaction, this your attack will gain a +3, and this is super powerful for Klee and the Mona combination, because essentially you can Vaporize, right? Vaporize already allows you to deal an additional 2 damage, so it's 2 plus 3, that's a total of 5 damage. And then if you have Mona's Elemental Burst coming in, and if you have the illusory bubble, you will be able to multiply your attack times 2 plus the 5 bonus Vaporize damage. So even if your opponent has shields on, even if they have Lotus online, they're probably dead. I don't know. I haven't done the maths here yet, but they are very close to being dead from full health or lower. So yeah, Klee is a very interesting character that has a lot of cards to play with, a lot of tools to play with, and that is basically it. Play Klee, play elemental reactions, deal big damage. That is the summary of Klee. So getting into the deck, what does this deck do and why is it so fun to play? Basically, this is a very, very aggressive deck. It is, I think it's a hyper aggressive deck whereby you don't really care about defending too much or or recovering too much. You don't play any sort of recovery cards here, no recovery locations, no recovery food. The only form of defense here is to tank damage through the use of Lotus and tank damage through the use of Mona's skill and Pyro Agent's passive ability slash stealth ability, right? So essentially what you want to do with this deck is that you would want to set up elemental reactions through the use of Mona. You want to set up Klee's burst as soon as possible so that you can consistently deal pyro damage against your opponent. And then the oldest trick in the book in Genshin TCG, you have some sort of FTK threat here through the use of Pyro Agent, and he is able to take out any character if you have additional dice in your hand. Just in turn one, right? Assuming your opponent does not swap out to any other character. So in summary, this deck is fun. This deck is effective because it's just hyper aggressive. It tries to outvalue your opponents. It deals a lot of elemental reaction damage, and it also tries to get a lot of dice advantage as well through the use of Paimon, Liben, and when you get kills and you get extra dice through Gambler's Earrings. But yeah, this is just a super aggressive deck that aims to maximize the number of dice that you can hold and therefore maximize the amount of damage you can deal. But the key thing about this deck, or rather the Achilles heel that I see in this deck, is if you don't if you don't let Mona live, if she dies too early, this deck can be crippled quite easily because Klee is super reliant on Mona for the Vaporize damage, and well, less so for Pyro Agent, right? Pyro Agent can still do FDKs. Pyro Agent can still do big damage through the use of his easy to set up Elemental Burst. So Pyro damage can, or rather Pyro Agent can still be a bit of a threat even if Mona isn't around. But if Mona isn't around, I think Klee will be in big trouble. So yeah, I think this is a fun, aggressive deck, but please remember to keep your Mona alive. And you may have noticed that I actually didn't go into the strategy into too much detail because the guide is really, really good. The guide that Juslin has written is very good. So yeah, have a look at that. And here, this video is really just supplementing and complementing what they have written, and it's just some clips that can show you how this deck functions in action, right? So after looking at the team strategy, I just want to spend some time talking about the other members of the team and how you can use them. So I've already spoken a little bit about Mona, but I do think that she is a super critical member of the team here. Not least because she enables elemental reactions, but also because of her passive skill ability. So if you have already looked at some of my previous deck guides, I really like Mona as an opener because her passive skill allows you to swap to another character as a fast action. And I feel like that is super helpful because it allows you to scout out what your opponent is trying to do first. So for example, if you go first, and if you send out Mona first, you can scout what your opponent is trying to do. You can see what their first character is, right? And then you can decide for yourself, do I want to, deal some damage through by using Mona, do some Hydro damage and set up for a Vaporize damage turn, or do I want to just swap to another character immediately, like for example Fatui Agent, because I think I can probably threaten the FTK and I want to threaten the FTK. So yeah, Mona is a really solid character in general, and then her Elemental Burst is such a menace in this particular deck because dealing 4 hydro damage, right? Imagine if your opponent already has pyro damage applied on them. You deal 4 hydro damage, and then you also deal extra 2 vaporize damage. That is 6 damage. That is more than 50% of your opponent's HP. You also create 1 illusory bubble that is able to double the damage dealt for the next attack that is dealt to that opponent. If you pass it on to Fatui Agent, the normal attack gets multiplied into 4 HP, and that should take out a 10 HP opponent. If you know, use Pyro Agent's Elemental Burst on your opponent because maybe somehow they decide to swap to another character, or maybe they decide to heal up their character, essentially the Elemental Burst deals 10 damage instead. So yeah, I think Mona is there mainly because to enable Vaporize damage, swap around very quickly through the use of her passive, and also threaten big damage through the use of Illusory Bubble. Next up, we have Fatui Pyro Agent. This is a character that I've been using since the Genius Invocation TCG came out. In fact, he was featured in my very first video in this channel. So he is a very good character because first of all, he's able to absorb so much damage. Through the use of his stealth ability, essentially, you will be able to take one less damage every time he gets, damage dealt to, right? And then he's also able to deal +1 damage as well through the use of his stealth ability. So first of all, he's a tank. Second reason why he is so good is because he is able to FTK your opponent. So FTK, yeah, sorry, he's able to first turn kill your opponent if you're not familiar with the FTK term. Essentially, what the line of playing for Fatui Pyro Agent as an FTK killer, right, is that you start with Pyro Agent. One way to do it is that you start with Pyro Agent, and then you use his normal attack. His normal attack is going to deal 3 damage because of stealth, right? So it does 3 damage against your opponent, and then your opponent will hit back, and then you lose stealth, and then you hit your opponent again for the normal attack again, dealing 2 more damage, bringing your opponent's active character down to 5 HP. By the time you have used both of your normal attacks, right, you will be able to bring your Elemental Burst online and then deal 5 more damage and then go in for the kill. Just to give an example here, you can see that this recording, or rather this match, only lasted for 2 minutes. This is the average FTK experience. Essentially, you try to get an additional elemental dice so they can have 9 dice in total, so that you can attack with Pyro Agent 3 times. After that, you just go into the game, start with Pyro Agent, try to kill off their Xingqiu, and hope that they don't swap their Xingqiu out so that Xingqiu takes 10 damage. Essentially, what you have to do is that you attack with Pyro Agent for the normal attack, right? Pyro Agent deals 3 damage in terms of normal attack, and then in the next turn, Pyro Agent deals 2 damage for normal attack, and then in the final turn, you just play your dice, you get 3 dice, Pyro Agent does the burst, and then Xingqiu dies, and then your opponent concedes. So that is the average FTK experience with Pyro Agent. He's a menace, essentially. That is basically the entire team lineup in this deck. Next up, let's talk about key cards and your opening hand and what that opening hand can look like. So just to kind of agree with what Juslin has already said in the guide, basically there are some cards that are really good for your opening hand, especially good for your opening hand. For example, this guy, right? I've already shown you in the FTK video, in the FTK opening hand, why this card is so good. Is because it just enables your FTK, right? Without this card, you can't FTK with Pyro Agent. So the moment you draw this card, that's when you know, hey, I might want to go all in and have an FTK with Pyro Agent. So this card is definitely a card you want to start with. Other cards that you want to start with as well would be the things that are free, right? So Chang the Ninth, I think it is worth starting with this. Maybe you don't have to roll for it. I don't think you have to roll for it. It is nice to start with. But cards that would be really nice would be the Bestest Travel Companion. I think this card is worth rolling for. The reason is because this deck is pretty elemental dice hungry. For example, if you play the Fatui Pyro Agent FTK line, you would need a minimum of 7 Pyro dice, right? No, it's a minimum of 5 Pyro dice because you need to normal attack twice and then burst once. And then rolling for 5 Pyro dice is a very, very low chance of you to do that, and you probably need to burn cards for that. So things to re-roll and mulligan for would be Bestest Travel Companion and Toss Up. These two cards are basically really, really good in your opening hand. Other cards that are worth re-rolling for would be Liu Su. I think Liu Su is really good because you can start with Mona and then you can just play Liu Su and pass yourself on to probably Klee so that you can set up her burst as soon as possible, right? So Liu Su is worth re-rolling for. Other cards that would probably be worth rolling for as well would be Paimon and Liben, because for this particular deck, you can either threaten FTK or you can use your cards like Paimon and Liben and start to ramp up and get even more dice across the next few turns. And with this deck, you know, the more dice you have, the more damage you can deal, because you can go into Mona, do some hydro damage shenanigans, change over to Klee or Pyro Agent, and then do Pyro damage twice and go back to Mona and do it all over again. So the use of Paimon and Liben really enable you to attack about 3 to 4 times in a single turn, and that's just great, right? So yeah, so just to summarize, for me, opening hand cards that you want to reroll for would be this guy here, Bestest Companion, Toss Up, and maybe Paimon or Liben. So that is my take. Maybe even changing ships, right? But yeah, I'm not gonna be greedy because if the more I include here, it just means hey, reroll for everything. But yeah, no. Yeah, that is my pick. Paimon, Liu Su, Dice, Companion, and Toss Up, with the dice being the highest priority for me. So what does the ideal turn 1 look like? So I've already shown, you know, what turn 1 can be if you're trying to FTK your opponent. In this video, I'm not on turn 1, I'm on turn 3, but there are two ways to play on turn 1. Either you play the FTK or you go for ramp, which is the combination of both Liben and Paimon, right? So in this particular game, because they are playing a free stack and they sent out Xingqiu first, I decided to just go for the FTK and kill off their Xingqiu as quickly as possible. But let's pretend that this is another team, a team that is not setup dependent, a team that is a little bit more tanky, and therefore you want to have ramp instead. So ramp decks, or rather the ramp strategy, would be really good for any other deck, any other team that is not setup dependent, right? And I just wanted to show you why setting up Liben and Paimon on turn 1 can be very powerful, because essentially, you know, when it gets to your turn, you get 2 extra dice from Paimon, right? And then you also get extra dice and cards from Liben. So with Paimon, 2 extra, with Liben, 2 extra, and then basically you start your turn with a total of 12 dice, which is very menacing. Because what can you do with 12 dice? With 12 dice, with changing shift, with additional dice in your hand, you can attack for up to you know, at least 4 times, right? And attacking for 4 times could actually mean that you can you can set up the burst for both Klee and Mona, and you can even play the burst as well. So 12 dice is a menace in this particular deck because you can just deal a shit ton of damage, right? Um, so yeah, that's basically the ideal turn one. Either go for FTK and kill off the annoying Xingqiu or whatever elemental setup reaction card they have, or if your opponent is playing control, right, like Sucrose, Gene, Dual Control, etc., you want to use the ramp because, you know, if they want to control you, great. You play Mona, you Vaporize, they can swap you to your next Pyro character, and then you can keep attacking, right? So having the ramp is really, really good if you're playing with against any other team that does not require a particular setup character. Now that we've looked at your team, the strategy, your ideal turn one play, and your ideal opening hand, let's look at the deck and look at, you know, the card selection here. So to start off, we have, you know, instead of looking at equipment, let's look at the dice farming package, right? The dice fixing package. And I really, really like this deck because there are just so many different ways for you to ensure that you have dice advantage and to ensure that you can regenerate dice as well. So Gambler's Earrings, everyone knows this. Whenever you kill off another character, you get 2 Omni dice. This is great if you are using Klee to kill off your opponent's character, and hopefully you are big brain enough to, you know, even after you get the additional 2 Omni element, if you have even number of dice, it means that you might be able to get that extra, you know, +1 damage from the charge attack, right? So that is probably something to look into, those play patterns. Other cards that you have to increase the number of dice, it would be Paimon, right? You pay 2, and then, or rather, you pay 3, and then you can create 2 Omni elements for the next 2 turns. You play Liben, cost 0, which is always great. You collect 3 unused elemental dice, and then you can create 2 elements and to allow you to draw 2 cards. You also have your standard Pyro dice damage. I've already spoken about why this is so important for enabling your STK plays. And you have the Bestest Travel Companion that can help you to fix your dice because this is a pretty die heavy team because you need to, more often than not, you need to use the elemental skills to do more damage, right? So this is a pretty dice heavy, dice hungry team. This card allows you to reroll your dice 2 times, and it's just really, really helpful, right? If you're trying to pivot your strategy, maybe previously you thought you wanted to go into Mona, but maybe you want to go into Fatui or Klee, right? So this toss-up is a really good card as well in this particular deck. And that is it for our dice fixing dice farming package. And next up, we have the card advantage package. Card advantage is good because you can either use your additional cards to fix your dice, or you can draw into your cards the cards that you need at that point of time and play those cards because that's the point of cards, right? You get cards to play them. So first up, you have Chang the Ninth. When it gains 3 inspiration, you can basically draw 2 cards. The way to get this in this particular deck is to really trigger elemental reactions through the use of Mona plus any other Pyro character, so that you can repeatedly trigger reactions and then gain card advantage. So Chang the Ninth is one of those cards that can allow you to draw more. The other card that allows you to draw more is Strategize for a cost of 1. Basically, you draw 2 cards. So this basically just kind of like Pot of Greed and Yu-Gi-Oh! Except that you need to pay for it. So maybe Pot of Avarice, I think. But yeah, Strategy allows you to draw cards. So those are the 2 card advantage engines that you have. Next up, we have the energy package here. So Liu Su is a card that I've been using in most of my deck tags. It's a card that is very, very popular amongst the community because just for a cost of 1, whenever you switch a character, if the character that you have switched to does not have any energy, you will gain 1 energy. So this is super helpful for characters like Klee and Mona because, you know, 3 energy bursts, they are not easy to set up, right? So by switching over, by using Liu Su and switching over to them, you'll be able to get 1 step closer to that nice, sweet, sweet burst damage. So Liu Su is one of them. The only other cards, or the 2 cards that you can have to increase your energy, would be I Haven't Lost Yet. If your character is defeated this round, you can play it to gain +1 energy and 1 Omni dice. And the other one that you have is Kelsak's Art. There's only 1 copy of this in this particular deck, which I agree with because I haven't really felt the need to really play Kelsak's Art. It just feels like, you know, the team's elemental burst is set up it set up pretty quickly, quite naturally, because of the strategy that you have to ramp up dice and attack multiple times, right? So I think you can probably get energy pretty naturally, but it's just a good fail-safe to have, right? Just in case you desperately need to shift energy from one character to another. So those are the cards that you have to increase the energy in the stack. And last but not least, we have our damage increasing package. This is actually the most exciting part of the deck, and this card is really good. This card is the reason why so many people play two Pyro characters in their team, because for the cost of just one Pyro dice, your Pyro related reactions will get +3 damage. So if your opponent forgets about this card, if they want to gamble against you thinking, yeah, you definitely don't have this, haha, so you can just play this and then you can snipe off their character and yeah, essentially gain character advantage. So this card is super powerful, big fan of this. This is why people play double Pyro teams. The other card that is really good as well is Adeptus Temptation. So what you notice here in this particular team is that you, more often than not, you use bursts at least once, right? So with the Pyro agent out as the active character on turn 1, you might use him for FTK. And in Juslin's guide, what they've mentioned is that, hey, if you don't manage to use Pyro Agent to kill off your opponent, if they decide to use a Lotus, etc., don't worry, because just save your burst for turn 2, play Adeptus Temptation, and then essentially your burst would deal 8 damage instead, which is, I think, a really good idea, right? So Adeptus Temptation can be really good because it increases your attacks for Pyro Agent to 8 damage, increases Mona's burst to a 7 damage attack, and then it also increases Klee's burst to a 6 damage attack. So all in all, you know, with this team, you love the burst and you love Adeptus Temptation. So yeah, that is the end of this guide. In summary, this is a very fun, very efficient deck. Give it a go. If you think there's any other way that we can build this deck or any other way that we can play this, let me know in the comment section below. But just to summarize, right, what you want to do with this particular deck is that you go in and then you either try to use Mona to set up hydro damage and you try to maybe ramp as well through the use of Paimon and Liben. That's option number 1. Option number 2 is that you start with Pyro Agent and then you try to take an FTK, kill off one of your opponent's characters, and then start to set up Klee's burst so that you can use her burst to go into Mona and do multiple Vaporise damage through the use of Mona's attacks, skill, and also Sparks and Splash. So this is a very fun Vaporise team, but yeah, just remember, never let your Mona die. She is super important. She can tank damage, she can absorb damage, but just do not let her die. And on the flip side, if you are watching this guide so that you know how to kill this team, if you can somehow convince Mona to come out through the use of Gene or Sucrose, or if you can just somehow do an FTK on Mona, yeah, take it out, and this team will be a lot less threatening and a lot less efficient. So yeah, that is basically the summary of this particular deck tech. I hope I did this. I hope I did Juslin justice by doing this very brief introduction. But yeah, let's get into the gameplay and see how the deck performs against real opponents. So in the first game, we have a match against Ayaka, Ganyu, and Xingqiu Freeze. This is actually a pretty popular deck in the Asian meta in recent times. And with this deck, I'm actually thinking that I should try to kill off Xingqiu first, so that they can, so that I can prevent them from setting up Freeze in the first place. And what I'm trying to do here is that I am probably just trying to go for the ability to go for an FTK. I don't actually know why I mulliganed the Pyro dice away. That was probably not the best move here, because without the Pyro dice I would not be able to do a proper FTK, because I do need the 3 elemental dice. But yeah, I guess I was probably a little bit inexperienced. I wasn't very sure about what I was trying to do with the deck, but keep in mind having the Paradise in turn 1 in your opening hand is a very good thing. It enables your FTK strategy, right? So keep it in your hand. Don't be like me. Don't mulligan it away. So actually, this is a pretty terrible hand for me because I've got no Paradise at all. In fact, I don't think I can use any of the dice for any of my characters here. But luckily, I was just gonna go for the double normal attack and then end the turn. So I am probably just gonna sack another card here so that I can create Run Paradise and go for the second normal attack. Kelsus Out was probably the first choice to kind of sack for me because it didn't seem like it was a card that I could use right now because I was just gonna use my Pyro Agent's energy, right? And in the next turn so that I can burst. And that would mean that the rest of my characters would have no energy left. And therefore Kelsus Out was probably just a dead card in my hand. So I just, you know, used it and turned it into a Paradise so that I can turn my burst on. And again, getting pretty bad rolls, only one Paradise, and this is exactly why you need the different dice fixes, such as Toss Up or the Bestest Companion, so that you can, you know, increase the consistency of this particular team. Because, you know, since this team is dealing a lot of elemental skill damage, dealing a lot of elemental burst damage, you do need a lot of aligned dice, and that is why dice fixes can be pretty powerful. So using the Toss Up again, and finally, you know, rolling some Omni die, which enables me to use the burst. So I go in for the kill, but unfortunately the Xingqiu already was able to burst before they died. And the Ayaka is also able to freeze my Pyro Agent as well. So my Pyro Agent is surviving, but I'm just kind of thinking whether I could just end my turn here. Yeah, so I do end the turn here, probably allow the Pyro Agent to die in the next turn. But the reason why I do this is because I wanted to set up Paimon and leave 2 more Omni dice for Liben so that I can start my next turn with a total of 12 dice.
You can't run from death.
So with that, Pyro Agent dies and I send in Klee. On hindsight, that's actually probably not the best play. I think what I should have done is to go into Mona, allow her to take the Hydro application, and then on the start of my turn, I can use Changing Shifts and shift into Klee for free. And I feel like on hindsight that would have been the better play because right now I'm basically exposing Klee to a freeze reaction against Ayaka, and that is just not ideal / optimal. And luckily I drew into the Leave It To Me and I just, you know, used Changing Shifts and shift back into Mona. So this really just shows that I should have just switched over to Mona in the first place because I really can't afford to let Klee die. The moment Klee dies, there's just not enough damage being dealt by Mona to kill off both Ayaka and Ganyu, and that is why I'm trying to use Mona to apply Hydro to both Ayaka and Ganyu so that I can go in for a big Vaporise hit through Klee. So here I'm just dealing another damage with Mona again. Reason for that is because I know that my opponent can potentially hit me once more. If I were to bring Klee in, they would probably just freeze me and force me to swap again to Mona in order to do any more damage. So that is why I basically stuck in with Mona and only dealt one damage there, even though it's not super efficient. And with that, I'm actually able to swap into Klee, do some damage with her elemental skill, and then potentially use the dice as well to hit once more with the normal attack. So this is why I say that if you want to play Klee, right, you have to be pretty good with your maths, because you have to be very clear about how many dice you're going to have left. Are you going to have even number of dice so that you can use Klee's charged normal attack? And just with that, right, by attacking with Klee twice, Ganyu goes down to just 2 HP from 10 HP. So I think, you know, this Vaporise combo that we have with Mona and Klee and maybe the Pyro Agent as well is really powerful. So now I'm just trying to go all in with my attack. I need to kill Ganyu, and I need to do it somehow, right? I need to kill all of their characters somehow, because Klee's in the danger zone now. Klee only has 5 HP left. If I allow her to take any more hits, she would, you know, just die. And what happened here is that Klee actually just takes the hit from Ayaka and is knocked out. But luckily, I know that I said that Mona can't do that much damage, but luckily Mona has already, you know, been waiting in the back, waiting for Klee to do some chip damage to both Ayaka and Ganyu. And luckily I've got the Adeptus Temptation in my hand as well. And that means I will be able to take out Ayaka through the use of Mona. So one thing I should have done here is that I actually messed up this play. I should have attached the Gambler's Earrings to Mona, take out Ayaka, create 2 more Omni Dice, and then kill off Ganyu. Actually, what I'm doing right now is that I risk myself to being exposed to a kill by Ganyu, because if they actually ended their turn here, so now they use some archery thing, right? They use their normal attack. But if they had actually ended their turn there, I would be in big trouble for the next turn. Because essentially they can end their turn, they take 1 damage from Mona's thing, and then the Snowflake will do 2 damage to Mona, right? And then I'm sure Ganyu can find some way to easily do 3 damage to Mona. So I feel like I should have played better there. I should have attached the Gambler's Earrings to Mona, and my opponent could have taken the game if they had ended their turn without doing anything, without you know, attacking me with the normal attack. But yeah, I guess in these matchmake games, you tend to make a little bit of mistakes here and there, and because of you know, Mona's burst, I was able to do 2 damage rather than 1, and my opponent knew it, and therefore Mona took the game. So GG's to my opponent, and let's go on to the next one. So the next game, it is another Vaporise deck. It is actually a Klee deck with Xingqiu, Klee, and Mirror Maiden. So Mirror Maiden is actually a really interesting character that no one has really been using too regularly. I feel like it's because her ability, her specialization, right, or her uniqueness is that she prevents your character from switching too easily. So if she hits you with her elemental skill, you need to pay 2 dice to switch out your active character, or rather you have to use 2 dice to switch out that character for the next 2 rounds, which is pretty annoying if you need to trigger elemental reactions and damage, etc. But the key assumption here is that you must, you know, if you use Mirror Maiden, you are assuming that your opponent is trying to deal elemental reactions, your opponent is trying to swap out very, very regularly, and that might not be the case all of the time, right? So Mirror Maiden is kind of like, it's a very niche card, I would say. It's probably a niche card that could be good in a control deck like Gene and Sucrose. Maybe you can see that, hey, your opponent actually wants you to swap their active character into the next character through the use of Gene slash Sucrose, and then, you know, instead of using Gene or Sucrose to swap it into the next character, you can even swap into Mirror Maiden to lock their active character in so that they can't go to the next character. So that's just, you know, me spitballing some ideas here. But yeah, I don't know, Mirror Maiden is just a pretty niche card for me. Not sure if I know the best way to use her. Maybe next time I will try to experiment with decks around her. So essentially with this, I actually lucked out in a sense. Well, I wouldn't say if I lucked out or not, because my opponent ate the mushroom pizza, right? And Xingqiu went from 5 HP to 6 HP. So even with my burst setup, and even with me drawing the Pyro dice there, I would still not be able to kill off the Xingqiu. So that was a little bit annoying for me, but hey, what can you do, right? So instead of using the dice, or using all of my dice to kill off that Xingqiu, or rather leave him at 1 HP, what I decided to do is to just set up for my next turns. So for example, I played the Liu Su. There was nothing else that I could play. My opponent actually switches into Mirror Maiden, which is interesting because I thought what they would do in the next turn is to play Xingqiu's Burst and then start to go off. But I think they also thought about the same thing as I did. And the problem here is that if he were to use Xingqiu's Burst, Xingqiu would have Hydro Application to himself, and then I can use Fatui Pyro Agent's Burst to kill him off through the use of the 5 damage plus 2 damage from Vaporise buff. So my opponent probably thought of the same thing as well and said, nope, I'm not going to let you have that Xingqiu, I'm going to switch into Mirror Maiden and let's see you try to kill it off.
No escape!
So essentially I went into the Prowl first rather than the Burst, because I needed Fatui Pyro Agent to start to soak up some damage, because I know that I was not able to kill her off anyway, right? So I might as well, you know, try to do some damage to her, while also trying to absorb some damage as well. So this is me trying to roll into the Paradise again, because I've been quite unlucky for this entire game. Or rather, not even this game, it's like the previous game as well, right? Like my dice rolls haven't been exceptional. I do roll into just one Omni dice. Then yeah, go in with 3 more HP or 3 more damage into the Mirror Maiden, hoping to kill her off in the next round. So my opponent here has 5 dice left. I knew that, I mean, assuming that they don't draw into any sort of recovery, don't draw into any sort of additional Hydro dice, they would probably just attack me once more and then call it a day, right? So I was just hoping that they would just attack me, allow me to end first and therefore attack first. And with that, I would be able to kill off the Mirror Maiden because I have the Adaptive Sensation, which will allow me to deal 7 damage to, or rather 8 damage to Mirror Maiden. So through these sequences of plays, right, hopefully you'll be able to see why Pyro Agent is such a threat and why Juslin decided to add Pyro Agent into this team. Because the main threat of this deck should be the Klee and Mona Wombo combo, but with Pyro Agent around, you can actually see your opponent trying to swap into different characters, trying to sacrifice their non-key characters so that you know, the key characters do not take a big hit from the Pyro Agent and die from Pyro Agent too early. So I really like Pyro Agent for that reason, because he's able to kill characters on his own, even without Vaporise buffs from Mona. So my opponent did exactly what I hoped they would do. They attacked me. I mean, I didn't want them to play some recovery, but they did anyway. But they attacked me, which allows me to end my turn first, and you know, allowing me to take out the Mirror Maiden in the next turn because I have the Adaptive Temptation. So I was very happy with the result. But I was not happy with the Zyro because there's nothing I can use here. I don't even want to go into Mona yet. I was just really hoping for as many Paradise as possible, which I finally get now. So I go into the Gambler's Earrings, learning from the previous game, use Adaptive Temptation to increase the burst damage by 3 and take out the Mirror Maiden, even though Mirror Maiden is at a high of 8 HP. So Adaptive Temptation is really good for this particular deck because you burst with your characters pretty often. And I know that it's actually controversial, right? Is it actually good for me to use Gambler's Earrings on my Pyro Agent? It's pretty controversial there because my Pyro Agent is going to die in the next turn anyway. But my thinking is that it is worth sacrificing that Gambler's Earrings on my Pyro Agent, because if I were to get 2 more Omni Dice, at least I'll be able to set up some damage through the use of Mona. So if they kill off my Xingqiu here, at least I can use my Mona to deal some Hydro damage through the use of her skill. So I'll be at least dealing 2 damage, right? Or so I hope. So that's exactly what I did, and I'm just waiting for Fatui Agent to die here. So Fatui Agent does die here, and I go into Mona. But the thing is, they already have
This is destiny.
Hydro application on them. So the real question here is, do I want to deal 1 more damage? And or do I want to set up for the next turn by playing Paimon? And you can probably see me thinking here because I'm just thinking about those lines, right? Like, which brings me greater value, playing a Paimon to get a ramp, or playing Mona's elemental skill just for that 1 or 2 additional damage. So I decided to play Paimon instead. I'm really wishing that I had Liben here, but essentially I realized that I can still play I haven't lost yet to gain 1 energy and gain another elemental dice, and then playing that elemental dice in my hand just to attack with Mona once. So that's exactly what I do as well. Some people might disagree with this play and may say that, hey, this is a little bit wasteful, but my thinking here is that I really just wanted to set up Mona's burst as soon as possible, so that once I do that, I would be able to go into Klee and then do some massive damage, right? So that was basically the thinking behind this. So rerolling here, hoping to get another Hydro dice so that I can either use Mona's burst immediately and go to town with Klee Vaporise damage, or it also gives me the option to start to use Mona's skill so that I can start to tank some damage here. Because with Xingqiu's burst on, I actually really want them to waste their normal attacks on me so that they can run out of their burst as quickly as possible. So I actually just go for the normal attack so that I can hold more Omni dice and more Hydro dice for their elemental burst, because I have a feeling that they were going to shift into their next character, into Klee, so that they can just deal big Vaporise damage and start to kill all of my characters. And that's exactly what they did. I think what they should have done is to deal some chip damage through Xingqiu, but maybe they just didn't have the right dice to do it. If I were them, I'd probably just use Xingqiu's skill, set up some shields, and go over to Klee again. But essentially, they just go into Klee immediately. I unleash the burst, and hopefully that allows me to deal a lot of damage, right? Because even though they recover now, if I go over to Klee, I will be able to multiply my my attack by 2 plus Vaporize damage. So I go into Klee, play the skill, and the skill does 9 damage, and this is just amazing, right? Because it's essentially, what is it? 3 damage plus 2 damage from Vaporise times 2, which is 10, and then 10 minus 1 because they have the rain cutter screen online. So 9 damage just because of Vaporize damage and because of Mona's ability. So that's just really, really insane. Very happy with that. And at this point, it seems like the game should be in my hands, but I wasn't very sure yet because the Xingqiu is very tanky. They have 9 HP left. They do have Hydro applied to them, but my Klee only has 6 HP left, my Mona only has 5 HP left. So I really needed a miracle here, and I actually drew a miracle, which is a Pyro Resonance, because by playing that, I'll be able to increase my attack by an additional 3 damage, right? So I play the Pyro Resonance. Deal a total of 8 damage. And then even if the Xingqiu kills me here, I would still be able to go into Mona and do just 1 damage to Xingqiu. Yep, so they recover, which is pretty annoying, but yeah. So they are at 3 HP, and I decided to win this in style, which is to use the Klee Burst, dealing 3 damage here. So that took the win, and yeah, hopefully through the use of these 2 games, you'll be able to see how threatening both ramp and FTK game plans are. Really enjoyed this deck. If you have any comments, let me know in the comment section below. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already done so. So yeah, see you in the next one. Bye!